In a three-part docuseries titled House of Maxwell, BBC Two covers the rise and fall of the late and disgraced media mogul Robert Maxwell and his family. It shows that even though the spotlight was on the infamous Ghislaine Maxwell, her father was no Boy Scout either. It shows the deranged beginnings of the most popular female pimp in modern times. In this video, you'll learn more about who she is, what she did, and where she is now. Let's start off at the beginning. Ian Robert Maxwell was actually born Jan Ludwik Hoek of Slatina Selo, Czechoslovakia in 1923. Virtually all of the young Hoeks' Jewish family living in Czechoslovakia and Budapest died in the Nazi Holocaust. However, Robert Maxwell was able to make it safely to Britain by way of France. When he settled in Britain, he became a British Army officer and actually participated in the Normandy invasion. It was around this time that he officially changed his name to what we know him as today, Robert Maxwell. After the war, he got into the business of publishing academic and scientific papers, and although he sold them for a cheap price, they were certainly lucrative. With this fact clearly noticeable, he advanced himself by acquiring control of a publishing company, which he renamed Pergamon Press Limited in 1951. By the 1960s, the company was a major publisher of trade journals and scientific and technical books, and was making several minor acquisitions in the publishing industry. With his publishing company, Maxwell was able to get his foot in the door of the political world, and he later became a Labourite member of Parliament from 1964 to 1970. In the early 70s, reports came out of corporate infighting that focused on his shady dealings. Maxwell temporarily lost control of Pergamon 1969 to 1974, but won control again and rejuvenated the company. In 1981, he gained control of the country's leading printing concern, the British Printing Corp, revived its sagging fortunes, and resold it to its managers in 1987. In 1984, he purchased the Mirror Group newspapers, publishers of 6 newspapers, including the sensationalist tabloid Daily Mirror, and in 1989, he tilted the balance of Maxwell Communications towards the United States, buying Berlitz International Language Instruction, Macmillan Book Publishers, and Official Airline Guides. In 1990, he launched The European, a London-based English-language weekly newspaper circulated throughout Europe. In 1991, he acquired the financially troubled New York Daily News and was a willing front-page hero. But his reputation as a hero of sorts wouldn't last long. The financial empire he had created became unstable. Debts exceeded profits, and Maxwell was forced to sell part of Pergamon and float shares of the Mirror Group newspapers. In an effort to keep his empire from collapsing, he secretly siphoned $1.2 billion from 2 of his flagship public companies and from employee pension funds. Then, on November the 5th in 1991, while at sea, he mysteriously disappeared from his luxury yacht, and his nude body was later recovered from the Atlantic Ocean. An autopsy was inconclusive, but the unofficial probability was suicide. Following Maxwell's death, the European ceased publication, and the Maxwell Communication Corp filed for bankruptcy in the United States and petitioned for court protection in Britain. His financial risks led him into grand fraud and an apparent suicide while at sea off of the Canary Islands. Soon after, his 2 sons were charged with, among other things, allying themselves with their father in fraudulent financial dealings. These details are essential as they'll be used to either increase the severity of Ghislaine Maxwell's sentencing or lessen the punishment. As for Robert Maxwell's youngest daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, she was born in France on Christmas Day in 1961. Most of her childhood was spent at Maxwell's Headington Hill mansion before attending university at Oxford. As early as the 1980s, when she was just a young adult, she was already an active member of the London social scene. This didn't change when she transferred to New York following her father's mysterious death. As a matter of fact, according to reports, Ghislaine was quickly accepted into the elite social circle in New York, and it's here where she met financier Jeffrey Epstein. By the 1990s, Ghislaine and Epstein were already a couple, and even in 2003, Epstein described Ghislaine as his best friend in an interview with Vanity Fair. Like 2 peas of the same pod, Ghislaine was involved in the horrendous lifestyle just like her boyfriend and partner Epstein. Several victims who accused Epstein of grooming, sexual abuse, and trafficking also accused Ghislaine Maxwell of helping to groom underage girls for sexual exploitation and abuse. 30 years after the media tycoon Robert Maxwell took his life, his daughter Ghislaine was arrested and charged with the crimes of enticement of minors and sex trafficking of underage girls, in connection with convicted sex offender and financier Jeffrey Epstein. By 2020, she was arrested in New Hampshire by the FBI. So, where the heck is Ghislaine Maxwell today? Ghislaine Maxwell is currently incarcerated and awaiting sentencing. On the 29th of December 2021, she was found guilty and convicted by a jury in the U.S. federal court on 5 sex trafficking-related counts with a potential custodial sentence of up to 65 years imprisonment. The counts include one of sex trafficking of a minor, which she has a maximum of 40 years, and one of transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, which carries a minimum sentence of 10 years. As she was also found guilty of conspiracy to transport minors with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors, and conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. The minimum sentence is 15 years, which means Ghislaine Maxwell might never see a sunrise as a free person, even though she was cleared on the charge of enticing a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. On top of being convicted of recruiting and trafficking young girls to be sexually abused by late American financier Jeffrey Epstein and his rich and famous clients, a U.S. jury convicted her of 5 out of 6 charges. And the legal process is not over for the 60-year-old Maxwell. She also faces a separate trial for perjury, but she is due to be sentenced on the 29th of June this year. She faces decades behind bars. For the crime of sex trafficking alone, which carries a maximum sentence of 40 years, Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty, and this was the most serious charge against her. Overall, Ghislaine Maxwell is facing around 65 years in prison. Her prison term will be decided by U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan. For the moment, Judge Nathan will be waiting to receive a pre-sentence report. This will be compiled by an impartial investigator who will look into things like Maxwell's background, family, education, and employment history to determine if any of these should influence the severity or leniency of the sentence. In a statement to the BBC, Sarah Krisoff, a former prosecutor with the Southern District of New York, said she expected a very significant prison sentence for Maxwell. She went on to say, "Given the involvement of minors, the judge has really great discretion to impose a significant sentence. And based on the evidence that was presented at trial, frankly, I expect the judge to impose a very severe sentence upon her." While awaiting sentencing, Ghislaine Maxwell will be held in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, where she has been kept in isolation since July 2020. Although she's constantly complained about the conditions at this facility, her cries seem to have fallen on deaf ears. But we'll see if her appeal also falls on deaf ears. Of course, Maxwell's legal team swiftly announced their plan to appeal against the verdict. Bobby Sternheim, one of Ghislaine's lawyers, had a statement for the public as she stood outside the court. She said, "We firmly believe in Ghislaine's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated." But this all seems like an empty threat. Getting a verdict like this reversed on appeal is no easy task. Any legal expert would say the same. Regarding this matter, Carl Tobias, professor of law at the University of Richmond, told Reuters, "She would have to show some error in the way the case was tried or some jury misconduct, both of which will be difficult to show." And keep in mind, there's another imminent trial for Ghislaine Maxwell. She still faces 2 perjury charges, which each carry a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. She has been accused of lying under oath during a 2016 deposition for a lawsuit filed against Epstein by one of the accusers, Virginia Guffrey. That lawsuit has already been settled for an undisclosed amount. However, during the deposition, which is a sworn out-of-court testimony, Maxwell repeatedly said she was largely unaware of Epstein's abuses. Prosecutors have used parts of that testimony as basis for the perjury charges and accused her of making false declarations. It has been reported that the trial for this perjury case will be sometime in 2023.